Go.
All right, cool.
Nice.
All right. Yeah, so that was interesting. So, I my assumption is that they get a lot more deliveries for hard seltzer than they do for mundane
Soft seltzer.
But they carry Strawberry Waterloo, which is the absolute nectar of the gods.
Fuck you.
Yeah, it's super good. So I ordered some, and then he got here, and you were giving me shit because he was running late, and I didn't want him to, like, call in the middle of our episode.
Yeah.
And then he got here. He tried to card me for the seltzers, and I had to, like, talk him into, like, not doing that because, you know, if I don't have to have, like, a face-to-face interaction right now with everything going on, like, I try to avoid it. And so finally...
Buddy, that's just flavored bubbly water, man.
Yeah, man. That's what I said. I was like, dude, that is just regular old... And did you call me in the middle of it?
No, you called me.
Oh, I must have just accidentally hit call while my phone was in my hand.
I know. I was like,
why?
All
of a sudden, I'm like, wait, what is Evan doing here? You're just like, your face is just on my phone, and I didn't even have time to stop and think about it because all of a sudden I hear you say, "So what? He doesn't have cables?" And I'm like, what? And so the guy calls me from my porch and is like, "Hey man, can I get a jump?" And Evan's already giving me a hard time because I'm running late for the show on account of I need my Celsius. And next thing you know, this guy, you know, poor guy, his car breaks down, and I sort of lied because I do have cables, but I don't know where they are, and I didn't want to go hunting for them. And I just ran into this issue with my roommate like last week or last month, something, where I couldn't find my cables, and I was like, I don't have cables. And he's like, oh, don't worry, I do. And I was like, all right, well, I'm not going to, it's cold out. Like,
I don't have a car.
Yeah. Oh, the reason I don't have cables is because I don't have a car.
Yeah. Well, if I had cables, I would have a car to put them in. So no, sorry.
But then even then,
so that's
like,
funny. So all of a sudden you just look down and I'm like, hey, bud.
Yeah, and you're just like there, and I was like, did he just call me? Did I pick up? I wasn't sure what happened.
You must have just accidentally like butt dialed me.
Yeah, I had my phone in my hand, and I must have just because I was open to texting you because you were being indignant. Anyway, so that's that. That's the episode. So have a great week, everybody. Thanks for tuning in.
I'm drinking a pineapple lemonade.
Yeah, that's fine. It's not as good as a.
No, it's not. I do prefer the strawberry.
Yeah, strawberry Waterloo is a top 3 flavor for me.
Yeah,
it's remarkably good. Good evening. I'm Chester Nutsack Dole, and welcome to another edition of Left Unsolved. Have you ever felt totally at home with a particular group of friends? So comfortable and self-assured in their company that you felt as though nothing could harm you? Did you ever get naked with those friends and fool around on a mountain, filled with lust and youthful abandon, shirking responsibilities in favor of indulging fully in the wanton, sex-filled springtime of youth? Assuming you answered yes to all of the above, you might find yourself relating to the subjects of today's case from the Left Unsolved files. What began as a fun-filled romp through the Ural Mountains one cold Thursday morning in February of 1959 would end up casting a grisly stain over the brooding edifice, known to locals as Death Mountain. The investigation that would ensue, and the questions it dredged up, have left behind one of the greatest unsolved mysteries of the modern age. Intrigue, violence, and the cool yet supple grip of death's soft hand on the quaking shoulder of innocence. All this and more on tonight's special edition of Left Unsolved. Well, hello and welcome to Left Unread, a show about things that happen that we feel a particular way about. We did not change our name, and no, we did not suddenly decide to become a true crime podcast.
Just want to reiterate, we are not a true crime podcast.
Yes,
Do not call us that.
We have differing opinions on that particular genre, but today we are kind of veering into that territory for a particularly fun bit of Soviet history. That's right. Today, folks, we're going to be talking about the Dyatlov Pass Incident. I want to note, I mean, we talk about all sorts of stuff, but I feel like this one, there's some particularly graphic and intense descriptions of injuries that are caused by sources unknown. All right, and that's where my my true crime podcast persona ends, because we're not going to do the whole episode like that.
Yeah, we kind of do know at this point.
Yeah, I mean, well, okay, so yes and no, but there's a pretty good theory.
Yeah.
All right, so the Dyatlov Pass Incident. So
Yes.
Yes.
It's fun to talk about. But
Yeah, well, before we get into it, do we have a sponsor today?
Yes, we do. All right, folks. Well, today's episode is brought to you by Moose Wilkerson's Rootin' Tootin' Funtime Cryptid Hunt Adventure Park, the only adventure park that hunts mythical creatures and not your wallet. Unlike that cat Moses Wilkerson and his spraying and praying cryptozoological safari extravaganza. So grab the whole family, skedaddle on down, and strap in for a wet and wild time hunting your favorite cryptids from around the world. Whether it's the Himalayan snow gulch Yeti shoot 'em up or the Mothman Mountain Junction Pass, it's sure to be a real blast for the kids and mom and dad. We've got such world-famous attraction as Nessie's Lock and Loaded Riverboat Jamboree, the Bigfoot Brouhaha and Barbecue Grill, and the Abra Chupacabra Alakazam Mystic Funhouse. We'll have the whole family laughing so hard you'd think you were a pack of Jersey Devils. So come on down tomorrow and experience the thrill of the cryptozoological world.
Wow. Yeah, that's awesome. Do the kids get like live ammo, or what? So what are they doing in there?
Yeah, it's all live ammo. Yeah,
that's awesome.
Yeah.
So what do they just dress up like a like a dog or something as Nessie?
Yeah, the famous cryptid known as a dog. Yeah.
All right. Yeah, that's great. It's a good time, and honestly, I mean, you know our philosophy here at Left Unread. It's better to start your kids out young when you're teaching them how to use your gun, because you never know when the ghost of Barack Obama is going to come and try to take it away from them. Yeah, he's not dead yet, but whatever, poetic license.
Yeah. And remember, awesome. You want to go to Moose Wilkerson's, not Moses Wilkerson.
Yeah, Moses Wilkerson is less fun.
Yeah, it's not that cool. It's not that cool.
Cool, awesome. Well, thanks so much to them for that. That's really good.
Yep.
All right, cool. So you want to dive in?
Let's dive in, bud.
All right, man. Get your bathing caps on, folks. All right, so the Dyatlov Pass Incident, I guess I want to say that it's like a relatively well-known topic. There have been other podcasts and like hokey History Channel TV shows and unsolved mystery type things about it. There's also like some pretty cool stuff that you can find like on YouTube and things, and I'll sort of mention that in a little bit because purely for the visual aspect, because there are lots and lots of photos linked to this. But yeah,
you can't be on the podcast. You can't. Sancho the cat wants to be on the podcast. He's just standing.
Dude, I feel like he's always here for the start.
Yeah,
and then you start yelling
because I don't like sit there and pet him the entire time. And he's like, all right, well, fuck you then.
Listen, man, he's always looking at that stupid shiny box of his. Well, hopefully one day Sancho will learn to appreciate his father's work.
He ain't gonna appreciate it.
So I wanted to dive into Dyatlov Pass for a couple of reasons. I mean, first and foremost, just because we've been doing a lot of like really, not that this isn't serious, but lots of like, longer 2-part episodes. And I wanted to, you're in the midst of one right now, and I wanted to kind of divvy it up with something a little different. But there have actually been, recently this year, there have been some new developments to this particular case, which is like a 62-year-old case. And so it's always fun for me and Evan to try to link old stuff to new stuff. And I think that's, like one of the oldest adages about history is, you're trying to learn about the past to see how it impacts the present. So anytime some kind of new thing comes up that has to do with one of these old cool stories, it's always sort of inspiring to do an episode. And so reason two being that I've been reading this awesome and pretty thoroughly researched book by a guy named Donnie Eicher. And the book is called Dead Mountain, The Untold True Story of the Dyatlov Pass Incident. So this came out in 2013, and it was pretty popular. Sort of brought the notion of this case to the forefront for a lot of American audiences. And you'll see that, like, a lot of the movies, and we'll talk about, Evan and I both watched a really good movie. But so a lot of the movies and the podcasts and stuff also sort of came out in 2013. So I think he sort of dredged up a lot of interest in this. Because, prior to this, it was not as well known outside of the former Soviet Union. And even there, it was kind of secret for a long time, which is a little strange. But a lot of things in Russia were secret, and they weren't secret for crazy reasons. So who knows? So that book, which I highly recommend, kind of jumps back and forth between the events of 1959, and then he ended up taking a contemporary trip in like 2012 and 2013 to Russia, and he ended up getting a lot of really good primary source information from survivors and secondary source information from people that were sort of involved in the search and things like that. So wherever that info is sort of relevant, I've sort of tucked it into my research, but I'm not really going to talk too much about like his trip because it's really interesting and you should totally read the book, but I don't feel the need to like tell his story too much on our show. So I'm going to focus more on the parts.
He can tell it on his show.
Yeah, exactly. And apparently that book did pretty well.
Yeah.
But one thing the reason that I'm talking so much about him, I did really like the way that he framed the book. So this story for a long time has been kind of relegated to like, sort of like those cryptid stories where it's this sort of Roswell style, like, ooh, hokey crystals from Sedona type unsolved mystery, paranormal bullshit. And people sort of forget that this is a real human tragedy that actually happened to real people, and especially in the U.S., hopefully not as much anymore, but definitely at the time, things that happened in the Soviet Union were sort of always framed in a negative light, sort of no matter what was going on. And this really isn't...
everything was some shadowy sort of cover-up.
Right. And I think there's a lot to suggest that there's more to this story than that, I've come away from reading that book sort of feeling like more like this was sort of a human story about friendship and endurance and trust between comrades and people that were... I mean, I didn't even really use comrade on purpose, but they were also all super, super into communism for the most part. So... I just think it's a more interesting story in certain respects than it gets represented as. So, but that being said, it actually might be an alien conspiracy. So it is fun and worth talking about. So I guess first of all, I'll start with some backstory. So as I've mentioned, this story takes place predominantly in early 1959 in the Ural Mountain range of the Soviet Union. So I'll break that little tidbit kind of down into two parts. So 1959 is actually a really interesting time in Soviet history, and it's one that we don't really learn a lot about in the U.S. because all of Soviet history is sort of one big, long, bad event in terms of, at least according to our school curriculum. So,
I mean, I would say that probably like the late 50s, early 60s was probably when the Soviet Union was strongest.
Yeah.
Like, you could argue that was the height of it. I mean, that's when they won the space race with Sputnik, which shocked the world that they were the first ones to do that. And, they suffered insane tragedy defeating the Nazis in World War II. I mean, it was like 24 million people died.
Yeah.
It's kind of impossible to come back from that. But this was before the failures of Leonid Brezhnev, who basically oversaw the beginning of the collapse. But yeah.
Yeah, this really is sort of a little mini golden age for the Soviet Union. So, as I say here, in the mid-50s or the early 60s, the USSR is in sort of a cultural reawakening. So Stalin, who everybody knows, Uncle Stalin, he died in 1953. And starting sort of immediately, Nikita Khrushchev began maneuvering himself into the kind of de facto head of state position in the USSR. That position...
And he was a military man.
He was. Yep. And all of this could be its own episode. I'm going to paint in really broad strokes, and Evan might have some fun little tidbits for you, but I'm not like an expert in this whole story. So I'm just going to sort of talk about the parts that pertain directly to like our story today. But yeah, so Nikita Khrushchev, he begins maneuvering himself into the de facto head of state position, which in the USSR was kind of a nebulous thing usually, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like there's not always one. It's not like saying he became the next president. Like different chairmen and different heads in the military.
Yeah, it's also like sometimes they were both head of government and head of party.
Right.
Sometimes the head of government was not the head of the party, but the head of the party was, generally speaking, the premier, right? The chairman of the Supreme Soviet.
I think he was, right? He was the chairman of the Communist Party, but then he was also he was something. He was a military man.
Yeah, like you said, it was like very nebulous. You know, like being head of government didn't mean that you were head of the Soviet Union.
Right.
You know, being the leader of the Communist Party, and so there were some people who had very, very short ones, short, I guess, quote unquote, reigns, and then some like Brezhnev who were like 20 years.
Yeah, Khrushchev, I think, was like a solid 7 or 8 years he was in charge.
Yeah, I think he was about 8 or 9. Yeah, because he was like he like fully took over in I think about 56.
Yeah.
And then it was like 64 when he kind of fell out.
Yeah. And he, he sort of started in 53, but wasn't really fully in charge until probably 55, 56.
Yeah, fully consolidated.
But right away in 53, he started really pushing for something that we now know as, de-Stalinization.
Liberalization.
Right. And it was an idea that, like, he just sort of wanted to withdraw a little bit from some of these stricter, more intense, more totalitarian policies that Stalin had implemented. And, contrary to popular belief, not everything Stalin did was like objectively awful, but he certainly was interested in preserving his own position and had instituted a lot of things that were oppressive to a certain degree to the people in the country.
Yeah, and if I could, just a quick aside too, there's one thing that, as I've studied more about just like communist history, like one thing that you really realize is that like a lot of things about, especially like the Soviet Union, things that you also hear about China, a lot of it really is, like we like to think that they did propaganda and that we didn't, but a lot of it's propaganda. I even remember when I was in high school hearing about like the famine in Ukraine. It was called the Holodomor, and it was like an intentional genocide with like 10, 15 million people dead. But even now, there's like, if you look it up now, the like accepted number is more like 2 million people died, and there's a lot of maybe it was intentional, maybe it wasn't, but there's no consensus on that. So even in like 15 years, there's been that kind of movement on it.
Yeah, there are definitely, and again, we could do like a whole episode because this whole period of time is completely fascinating. And I think it certainly bears further examination, and my guess is that we'll probably dive more into a lot of these players in later episodes of the show, because it is really worth noting that the Soviets were adept at propaganda, but people sometimes forget that we also are. And
I mean, dude, look
Cold
at
War
like
U.S. propaganda is psychotic.
I mean, even now, like, look at Victims of Communism, which is like a huge, like, basically like CIA think tank.
Sure.
The Victims of Communism, and they list all of the global deaths of COVID as deaths attributed directly to communism.
Right.
Even though there's like not, you could argue there's not even a communist country on Earth anymore.
Right.
Even though, yes, I know there's some communist parties, but still, and the vast majority of deaths are under capitalism. But regardless.
Yeah. We digress. So under Stalin, higher education, universities, and the pursuit of learning or specialization in fields outside the sort of immediate scope of his plan for industrial and agricultural reform had been heavily, like, I mean, to put it lightly, we'll say de-emphasized, but I mean, more than that, like certain intellectuals were rounded up and disappeared and all kinds of things. So in addition to that, though, the pursuit of things that like today we think of as hobbies, or just generally directing your efforts away from working directly towards the betterment of the state. So any kind of you time or things that you were just doing purely for enjoyment or for your own benefit were sort of, I don't want to overstate it, but they were not given state sponsorship, right? Yeah. So things like hiking for the sake of hiking would always be sort of de-emphasized in favor of, well, if you like the outdoors so much, why don't you go and work on a communal farm, right? And that was the sort of party line. Again, it's a gross oversimplification, but we're just talking about facts that are relevant to history. So under Khrushchev's de-Stalinization efforts, higher education becomes a much higher priority. And so young Soviets who show promise in fields like engineering, chemistry, biology, and then, even to a lesser extent, the arts, they're encouraged to sort of attend any of the growing number of state-funded universities to allow them to better serve the state with enhanced knowledge in their field, right? So the prevailing idea for this period is actually it's not wrong to spend your time learning. Not everyone gets access to universities, and it's not like here now where like people think they have to go to college regardless. But if you show aptitude in a certain field, you get the opportunity to go and study, and it's not frowned upon to better yourself intellectually and to create more opportunities for yourself. There's also a growing DIY art and I said art and leisure. Because like I said before, hobbies, like we consider them now, were sort of suppressed a little bit under previous Soviet rules. People weren't encouraged to like take photographs for photography's sake or paint for painting's sake. Everything was sort of retooled to be done with the idea of furthering some sort of state goal. And that's still a part of it. I'm not going to pretend that has gone away. But the rules are a little bit looser, particularly when it comes to travel. So officially, Soviet citizens are still not allowed to leave the Soviet Union. The idea of whatever the Iron Curtain is still very much a thing, but travel within the Soviet Union is now not only allowed, but sort of encouraged. And people are encouraged to see the different regions, to travel, to experience the different cultures, the music, all the different things that make up the different constituent states of the Soviet Union. And even to a limited degree, they're sort of encouraged to absorb cultural exports from outside the Soviet Union. Now, you always had to be able to point to how it was bettering your ability to serve your state and the people. So certain things were still kind of frowned upon. Like they didn't love like people just like listening to jazz. But if you were picking up like radio broadcasts from outside and you could show like, well, I'm doing this because this particular broadcast provides valid information that helps me, I don't know, with my study of hydraulics, that was okay. And you could kind of get away with, they weren't doing like big massive crackdowns the same way that they were under Stalin. So like as long as you had like some sort of an explanation, it was mostly okay. You weren't going to just get hauled off by, the KGB over having a radio. And that will come up in a little bit. So with that as like our background, that's the sort of time period that we're talking about. I want to introduce our quote-unquote protagonists. So the main people that we're going to be talking about in this story, they are students, almost all students at Ural Polytechnical Institute, or UPI, which is a state-run institution for students studying what we would now consider like STEM sciences. It's located in the city of Sverdlovsk, which is one of Russia's largest cities, and the capital of the Sverdlovsk Oblast administrative region. So I apologize for my Russian pronunciation. I'm going to do my best, but some of these words are a little tough for me. If you're looking for Sverdlovsk, it's a little confusing. So the Soviets underwent in the 20s, I want to say up through the 30s, went through a real process of sort of renaming a lot of landmarks and rivers and cities and anything that had a name that was sort of derived from Tsarist history or religious history. So like St. Petersburg is a good example. They were renamed to something that was a little more, not necessarily like communist, but just things that were a little more bland, I guess. So Sverdlovsk city is just named after the region that it's the capital of. It's the capital of Sverdlovsk Oblast, so they name it Sverdlovsk city. But it's the city of Yekaterinburg, which was named after Tsar Peter the Great's wife, Catherine, and it is now renamed Yekaterinburg. So a lot of these cities you'll see have sort of double names like this.
Leningrad went back to St. Petersburg.
Right. Yeah. And Stalingrad was...
Well, I'm not sure.
Yeah. Well, a lot of the grads are gone now. So this is like sort of the policy. So they're in Sverdlovsk city or Yekaterinburg. So if you're looking for it on a map, that's where you're looking. The students that we're focusing on, in addition to studying to become engineers or scientists in various capacities, were also members of the city/university's outdoor club. They were all avid hikers, skiers, and kind of just generally interested in the Soviet concept of tourism, which it's the same word, but it had a very different meaning. So basically, like, tourism during Soviet Russia just was being someone who liked doing cool shit outside with your friends. Like, traveling around, seeing the sights, going on adventures, climbing a mountain, riding a bike, skiing down a mountain. And if you liked to go around and do that all over in different places, that's a tourist. It didn't have, like, the sort of modern meaning. So all the members of this group are rated grade 2 outdoor specialists. In Soviet Russia, there were grades 1, 2, and 3. These are the 3 official ranks.
Is one highest or lowest?
1 is the lowest. So grade 3 is the highest. If you're a grade 3 outdoor expert, you are rated to basically undertake any sort of outdoor adventure you could possibly want. And in Soviet Russia, you kind of had to get permission to do these things. They were handing the permission out. Like, they wanted people to do this stuff. But like in any, like, serious bureaucracy, I mean, if you're taking time off of your studies, which are state funded and ostensibly to train you to work for the state, and you're going to go and do something risky, the state wants to know about it. So you had to get permission, your routes had to be approved. It was all much more, it wasn't like, you know, we think of today. So they're going hiking. They didn't just like pick a day and I'll just go. They had to get it approved. They had to be members of a club. It really was pretty easy, but there were extra steps. So they're rated grade 2, which means they're allowed to do certain more advanced things. You know, most of us could probably get a grade 1 pretty easily. Grade 2 is like a pretty good skier and a mountain climber or whatever. Grade 3 means that, like, if you want to go climb Mount Everest, you can do it. They're pretty much approving you to do whatever you want to do. And also to instruct others, to lead expeditions, things like that. And so I think this is especially important to note because a lot of, like, later analysis of the following events sort of hinge on the party making, like, really dumb mistakes. And to be a grade 2 outdoors expert, I know we like to, like, downplay everything about the Soviet Union. They weren't, like, slouches. They were all really experienced and had lots of cool stories, and I'll mention some of them. But these were, like, serious outdoorsy people. And
not to mention also, you know, the Soviet Union, they went from in, like, 40 years, 45 years, they went from a total backwater peasant nation to winning the space race. So they kind of had the bureaucracy down. Like, they knew what they were doing with some things.
There's a lot that was going on that was right at this period.
They're not just handing these out for no reason.
And it is too bad because, you know, in a later episode we'll probably talk about it. But yeah, it kind of does slide back pretty substantially after this period. But right now, like, the period of time that we're talking about, the USSR is, like, looking pretty good. It's like a pretty nice place to live, not for everybody, but for more people than ever in the history of Russia. And, you know, you could make the argument that they were living as well as anywhere else in the world at this point. So it's important to note, like I said, because basically they're good at what they're doing. And actually, this expedition, importantly, they were going on in order to qualify for their grade 3 certification. So these are people that were not only grade 2, but were considered ready to be marked grade 3, like the highest tier of experts. And they're going on this particular trip with the understanding that when they get back, if they complete the various list items that they're supposed to complete, which is spending a certain number of time sleeping out in the wilderness, being a certain distance from a city, being covering a grand total of, I want to say it's like 300 kilometers for the trip, all on foot or on skis. If they check all these boxes when they get back, they'll be grade 3 certified. Excuse me, that's that strawberry seltzer. So Donnie Icar in his book does a really good job of sort of explaining and humanizing the members of the group. So I'm going to kind of, like, paraphrase and describe the different people we're talking about here the way he does. Because you don't see that in a lot of other sources. People tend to focus on, like, the aftermath of what's about to happen. But I think it's really, really nice to sort of look at these, again, like I said at the start, as sort of real people who were kind of going on what sounds like a really fun trip. And they were doing it with people they really liked.
Yeah, I was shocked when I learned how young they were. I mean, they were like fucking like 10 years younger than me.
Yeah.
Like, you know what I mean? Both of us, yeah. It was, it really added, I guess, another layer of tragedy to it.
Yeah,
like, these kids were...
They were young, and they were young at a time where being young in the Soviet Union was really promising. They were college students. They all had great careers ahead of them, theoretically. The group leader, it's not an official title, but he did sort of put this together, and it was kind of understood that he was calling the shots, was this guy named Igor Dyatlov, which is, you probably recognize the name, who was 23 at the time, and he's a radio engineering student. So he's well known, he's respected by all of his peers, not just because he's really good in school, but he's also a really well-known outdoorsman in his little area. He's the true embodiment, his sister, who is still alive, and was interviewed by Billy Eicher, I want to say, in 2012, talks about how he was sort of the embodiment of the Soviet tourist. Like, this is a guy who, like, just his ultimate thrill in life was going out and just doing stuff. Like, he wanted to go whitewater rafting and climb a mountain and ski back down it, and he was a real sort of like... I don't really want to say like man's man, but he was just sort of like the quintessential idea of like an outdoors person. Yeah. He's also super skilled. Like, so I said, he's a radio engineering student, and he got that opportunity because in his personal life, he's sort of obsessed with radios. Shortwave radios are still officially illegal during this period in the Soviet Union, but that law is not strictly enforced. It's kind of a gray area. The reason they're illegal, obviously, is like, you don't want people intercepting propaganda that's being piped in from Western Europe, or even just being exposed to what are considered like harmful cultural exports, like jazz, things like that. Yeah.
Rightist materials.
Right. You don't want any of that sneaking in. But one way around it, so you can't buy a radio, but you can build a radio. And generally speaking, if you can prove, like he could, that you were building them for educational purposes, nobody was really going to hassle you about it. So he's got a collection of like 50 personally made radios that not only like shortwave radios where you can talk to other people, but also radios that he can pick up a broadcast on. Important for our story, though. So what I was sort of wondering when I heard this is like, okay, so this is supposed to be some wilderness disaster. We've got a radio expert. Why didn't he just have a radio to call for help? I didn't realize this, but radios back then were like 100 pounds.
Fuck that.
Yeah, so no one questioned for a second why he didn't bring one with him. It would have been like the dumbest thing in the world, and no outdoors people ever had a radio with them. Not just for legal reasons, but just because lugging one along, it's like a whole person's worth of equipment.
Yeah, seriously.
So he's a charismatic, intelligent. He's a born leader. He's sort of the glue that holds the party together. And in the book, there's this really cool anecdote from a journal of one of his friends who he used to go hiking with about that just sort of describes his leadership style. So on a previous trip, he and his friends were out on the steppes around the Ural Mountains, and they found themselves, this is in like springtime, they found themselves facing down a stampeding herd of wild horses. There's nowhere that they can go. They're in the middle of a clearing. There's nothing to hide behind. And so everybody's panicked. They're like, we do not have time to get away from these horses. We're going to get killed. And all of a sudden, everybody hears Igor Dyatlov yell out, like, everybody, like, get together. Don't move. Nobody move. And so he gets everyone huddled together, and they all, like, are hugging each other tight. And when they're, like, 20 feet away, this stampeding herd of horses just splits and runs, like, right around them, and their hair's whipping in the wind. And finally, like, the dust settles and the herd is passed and nobody's got a scratch on them. And everybody's looking at Igor like, how did you know that? And he's like, I don't know. It just seemed like the right thing to do. And so there's all these stories about that. And so at this stage, like, people are positive he's going to get his level 3 certification, and he's naturally the person that's sort of in charge. Yeah. And then just going through the list of the other people, there's Zinaida, or Zina Kolmogorova, who's 22, described as lively, intelligent. She's also a radio engineering student. All of her friends really, really love her. She's funny. She's great at stories. They describe her as, like, tomboyish. I don't know if that's still a thing that we say, but whatever. That's how they described her. And apparently, like, a lot of the guys had secret crushes on her. That's going to come up later, too. But it should be noted that, like, at this period in time, and specifically with this group, everyone says that they were, like, super egalitarian, and I know that seems obvious considering, they were young communists, but I think they really took that to heart, and the women were not treated any differently than the men in this group. The other woman in the group is Lyudmila or Lyuda Dubinina, who's 20. She's the youngest. She's a super enthusiastic communist. They had like a running joke where they described her as like the girl with the gun and the ribbon, because she was sort of the living embodiment of like, if you ever see those old like Soviet propaganda posters where there's like young, beautiful communists sort of like proudly upholding the standards of whatever they're doing. Sure. She was like one of those in real life. Also known for being like super, super tough. One time on a previous trip, she got accidentally shot in the leg with a hunting rifle, and everyone's panicking. They have to carry her like 50 kilometers over the mountains to get her back to a hospital. And I guess the whole time she's like cracking jokes and making sure no one else is afraid while she's like pumping blood out of a gunshot wound to her leg.
God damn. Man.
Yeah, she's tough. Then there's Yuri Yudin, who's the first of three Yuris. There's three Yuris in this group. There's a procession of Yuris. So he's 21. He's a lifelong sufferer of heart problems, rheumatism, which is sort of like arthritis or like a blanket term for joint swelling and joint pain, chronic back and chronic knee pain. So he had gotten really into hiking as a way to like get healthy, but because he had such a long medical history, they made him like the group doctor just because he took more medicine than anyone else. So I guess that meant he knew more about it.
As a man who's taken medicine many times, I'm very good at prescribing it, I guess.
And then Yuri number 2 is Yuri Doroshenko, who will just be referred to as Doroshenko, another radio engineer. He was sort of known for a time when he was out hiking. A bear attacked him and his group, and he grabbed the only thing he had, which was a geology hammer, and just like single-handedly scared the bear off just by acting like a crazy man and running at it with this hammer. And before the bear had like time to realize like what was going on, it just freaked out and ran away. And so Yuri Doroshenko chased off a bear. Then there's Yuri or Georgy Krivonishchenko, who will just be called Georgy for the rest of this. He's 23. He's like the class clown. He's known for always joking around, and he's always got his mandolin on him.
Nice.
So he's constantly just like making jokes and playing mandolin. But he's also a student of construction and hydraulics and is very smart. Then we've got Alexander Kolevatov, 24, a big but patient man studying nuclear physics, so also not a dummy. He's most known for having this like really old antique pipe that he was constantly puffing away on. Even when they would go on hikes, they would make a rule like no smoking while we're away on hikes, and he would always break the rule because he had to smoke his pipe. Big and quiet and very private even among his friends. And then there is Rustem or Rustik Slobodin, 23. He's a friendly and unpretentious kid. He also loves playing mandolin. He's sort of like the 50s Soviet version of a rich kid. So obviously, like, they didn't have like more money or anything, but his parents were both college professors, and he had also already completed his degree. So he had sort of a more privileged background just by virtue of his parents being professors at a time when that was sort of at a premium. And apparently you would never know because he was super nice and unpretentious. And then the last is Nikolai or Kolya Thibault Brignoles. That's French, and I'm not good at pronouncing it. 23, and as expected, the grandson of French immigrants. Also had already earned his degree in industrial civil construction. A very serious guy who had apparently read a lot of books, but was also really funny when you least expected it. So these are the 9 people that originally set out from the campus to go on the trip. The reason that I wanted to go through all that is just to kind of hammer home the point that, like, A, none of them are stupid, and B, none of them are unprepared or experienced. We've got, like, a guy who fought a bear, a bunch of, like, nuclear physicists and radio engineers. These are all smart, really capable kids who went out to do a thing that no one expected would give them any trouble. So the trip is designed to cover, like I said, 300 kilometers of rough rural terrain. They're going to go on this trip to qualify for their grade 3. And their plan is to travel north, cross over the Ural mountain range in the very far north of Sverdlovsk Oblast, go to Mount Ortoten, which is like at the northernmost reach of the oblast, and end at the Lazva River, which is sort of like the demarker of the territory that they're from. This region is known as Western Siberia. It's not actually part of like Siberia proper, but it's sort of like the gateway from more temperate, more fertile Western Russia, where most of the population is, and like Siberia, which is 2/3 of Russia and is like a tundra wilderness filled with wild animals and local native peoples, and is very, very sparsely populated. And they're sort of going
trappers.
to school. Fur trappers. They're sort of right on the line with that. So they're going to go up into like the real wilderness. They spent months preparing. Their route is entirely logged. Everybody at the city committee for physical culture, which is like the governing body of their club, is aware of the timing of their trip. Everything's been stamped and signed, and the I's are dotted and the T's are crossed. This is not like a secret trip, or people know where they're going. They know who they are. They're all qualified, whatever.
Yeah.
So they're surprised when they get their book back that they've actually been approved for 10 people, and that they're going to be meeting another person at the train station. And so only one of them knew this guy. Igor Dyatlov knew him. This was Alexander Sasha Zolotaryov, who's the one old guy. He's 38. He's a combat veteran from World War II. And Igor knows that he's like an expert skier and an expert hiking instructor. And he was supposed to go out with another group that was approved through the committee, but at the last minute, like something changed. He wasn't able to make it in time. And so they said, oh, well, there's another group going up on a really similar hike. Do you want to, lump in with them? And Igor was like, oh, like I know Sasha. He can come with us. So they meet up with him, right? And the way that they describe the meeting is super funny. He's like this big, like old guy who's like grizzled, like cigarette smoking, like bearded. He's got all gold teeth.
That's awesome.
And he's covered in tattoos, which is really, really rare in the Soviet Union unless you're ex-military. And so, again, like I said, he's like a combat veteran from World War II, which, I mean, the Soviet Union was a meat grinder in World War II. Like, to have made it through that war and seen multiple stages of conflict, you got
being invaded by one of the greatest land armies ever.
Yeah.
Having them go in there and just through sheer will.
Yeah, just like completely pull off the win.
Yeah.
So he's got like a kind of checkered, tough history, but apparently
awesome.
he they're all kind of nervous because he looks kind of scary. And then it turns out that he's just like fucking awesome. And so again, there's going to be a lot of speculation later that like this weird ex-military guy who nobody knew, who like looks like a fucking psycho, had something to do with like what's about to go down. But it sounds from like all accounts like by the time they were done with their train trip, he was just like their buddy and everybody loved him. So the plan is they're going to take the train from Sverdlovsk north to the city of Ivdel, or more like a big town. And then they're going to hop a truck and go up to the frontier village of Vizhai, which is like the last northern city in Sverdlovsk before it's just nothing, or Mansi villages. And the Mansi are like the native people of this region. So they're an Ugric people. They're related to the Magyars of Hungary. And they're like a traditional steppe culture, so they hunt, they herd reindeer, and they trap fur. And they live in yurts, and they have a really tough, hard life.
That Finno-Ugric group.
Yes, yeah. Yep, so they're the only people up
play
north.
Crusader Kings.
Yeah. So once they get to Vizhai, that's the last settlement they'll be in, and then they're going to trek on foot the 300 plus back and forth kilometers to Mount Otorten, and then that's their trip. And everybody knows this is what they're doing. They have a strict itinerary because this is the Soviet Union. So multiple people have been informed, and the calls have been made, and the signatures are on the papers, and they're good to go. Everyone knows they're out there. And also, which I found really like endearing, they keep a group diary, which is like the most communist thing I've ever heard. Like they don't all have their own diaries. They keep a diary together, and everyone's allowed to do entries. And they sort of frame it like it's a daily newspaper. So they all write like little articles and sign them, and it's just kind of endearing. You know, they have this.
That's cool. Yeah.
And so
like, just like a daily log.
Right. And so that's how we know a lot of this stuff, like that everyone liked Sasha immediately because they write about it, and they let him start writing in the journal. Like he just sort of fits in, and he becomes like one of the more common contributors to the diary because he just like thinks it's really cool that all these young kids are super into hiking. And, you know, I think for him this was probably cathartic. You know, he found joy in nature after like a pretty tough early life, and so they're all just like gelling.
When he was like their age, he was fucking in World War II.
He was in fucking World War II on the Eastern Front, like having a bad time. And so now he's just like on a romp with a bunch of idealistic young people who never lived through that, and who did, but they were very small, and who they're just out to have a good time. So this is not like some doomed expedition. This is not like some like dark, dreary thing. Like there's all these tales of them being on the train and like singing songs, and they all have mandolins. And at this point in time, it's considered the period of bard music in the Soviet Union, which is like their analog to folk music. Yeah. And so because they didn't have access to a lot of outside music, and because officially recorded music was usually like government funded and just about the government, there was this really strong like DIY music scene. So everybody was writing their own music, and they would come up with ways to record it. And records were really tough to find because after World War II, vinyl was like extremely expensive and rationed. So they, like most things in this era, the Soviet Union was super punk rock. They came up with their own way to make records. They would buy X-ray glass.
Yeah, bone music.
Yeah. They would buy sheets of X-ray glass from like medical students, and that I guess you could have cut just like vinyl, and it would sound like a record. So they would like record themselves on homemade records, and they had all these songs and stuff. And if you got caught with like a collection of these, you could still get in really big trouble, even during like the 50s and 60s. You weren't supposed to have like recordings of non-state sanctioned music. So these guys are all singing like songs they're writing and stuff, having a really good time. They stop at an elementary school in Ivdel, I believe. And the schoolmaster like lets them spend the night there in exchange for giving a presentation to the class the next day. And so all the kids at the end of it like love them and end up like making them promise to take them on adventures. And so it's kind of just like a really idyllic group of like happy young people going out to do like a happy, fun thing. And so that's the message that I want you all to take away from this stage of the journey. Lots of hijinks and singing and whatever. So by January 27th, they've started their expedition. They've restocked in Vizhai, and they're set out on their on-foot trip. So this is like the fun times are over. I mean, they're still having fun. They're still writing. They're taking a lot of pictures. And you can find a lot of these pictures. Spoiler alert, the pictures are available online that they took on their trip. You can also see sections of their journal because a lot of this stuff we have. And so they've set out for Otorten Mountain. So January 28th, after one day of trekking, Yuri Yudin, who's the guy that I mentioned who had like physical problems his whole life, he's just been having like a really rough time. He's having a flare-up of rheumatism. His knees are basically not functioning. His back is stiff, and he's starting to have chest pains. And he's like, guys, I don't want to hold you all up because everyone's really worried about him. They're all offering to like help carry his stuff. And everybody's like, no, like if I never get my grade 3, it's not the end of the world. I'm going to turn back. I grew up not that far from here. I can walk the day back to Vizhai, and then I'll see if someone can give me a ride to my home village, and I'll just like hang with my family, and you guys have fun, and I will see you when I get back. And again, we know about this because they wrote about it, Sad to see Yuri go, but he wasn't feeling good, and it was cool of him to not make us stop the trip. So he heads off to go with his family. By January 31st, the group's records show that they've reached the point where they plan to cross the Ural Mountains. So this is entering into like the sort of final phase of the trip. They're crossing a pass between two mountains, and then after that, it's like a straight shot north before they end up at Otorten and the river. So they end up camping at the base of Holat Chal Mountain, which means Death Mountain in the Mansi language. And they set up camp there, and the next day they're going to kind of pass over the side of this mountain, hit the other side, and then they're going to head north. So Holat Chal, or Kolat Siakhl, something like that, in Russian, it doesn't actually mean like it. Well, so it does actually mean Death Mountain or Dead Mountain. But that's kind of misleading. So Holat Chal is a Mansi word. And like I said before, the Mansi are the sort of native people of this area. And they had a lot of place names and sort of landmark names that had dead or death in the name. And for them, all that meant was that there was no game there. It could also be like barren or spare. And the reason that they would call things that is just to sort of let other hunters know, like, hey, you know what? Like, don't waste your time because you're going to do a lot of walking and you're not going to catch much.
You ain't going to get shit.
Yeah. Like, that was really all it meant. So it's not some, like, ghoulish, ominous thing where it's like the secret mountain of the dead. Like, there's no legends about it. There's no, like, tribal tales of ghosts on the mountain. It's just, there's no game up there. Don't fucking bother. And, you know, these are real, like, people of the steppe. They don't go on like pleasure hikes up the mountain the same way as these young kids do. Like, for them, it's like, why the fuck would I climb up there? It's in the name, Dead Mountain. Sucks. There's nothing up there. Yeah. It sucks up there. Go over to Lots of Rabbits Mountain. That's a fucking great mountain. It looks the same. And you know what? There's lots of rabbits over there. Yeah. So they're camping at the base of Dead Mountain where there are no rabbits. And so it seems like what their plan was to do was to cross the Urals in one day, which is theoretically possible. But what we think happened is that a snowstorm sort of made them lose track of where they were. And one thing that kept coming up when I was reading about this is that Holat Chal is not like some super tall, super ominous looking mountain. It's actually like it's got a very shallow slope. Takes a long time to get from the bottom to the top. It's not gigantic. It's a mountain, but it's not like a huge mountain. And if you're standing on it, depending on the weather, it can be kind of confusing to tell when you're going uphill or downhill in certain parts, just because it's not a super steep slope. And so they end up, rather than climbing across it like they intended to do, they accidentally end up sort of veering towards the summit. And so by the time night falls, they realize that rather than cross over the mountain, they've kind of climbed up the mountain. And they're like, oh, well, shit. So they make camp at the top. And they are on a slope, so they have to carve out like some snow to make a flat area, and they end up staying up there. And again, it's kind of hypothesized that the reason they probably did this rather than like hike overnight was because they weren't particularly worried about it, and they were thinking like, well, like we're out here to learn, so why not practice our mountainside camping skills? Like we'll set up the camp here, whatever, we'll make dinner, and it's just going to be fine. They're all experts. They're all or about to be experts officially. And they're not going to just like make some dumb decision and camp in some treacherous place if they don't think it's like fine. So they make camp there because why wouldn't they? And this is where
somewhere.
Yeah, exactly. And they're like, fuck it. Like, why not? This is a good opportunity for us to like practice. And so we'll just practice. And so this is where their records end and where the mystery begins. Dyatlov back home had promised to send a telegram to the hiking club by or on February 12th. So whenever they returned back to the town of Vizhai, he was going to send a telegram back and say, we made it. We're on our way home.
Yep.
When this doesn't happen, nobody panics immediately because, I mean, this is pre-cell phones and all this stuff, and they're up in literal Siberia. Delays are common, so they're like, oh, whatever. A delay of 3 extra days is nothing to worry about. After that, we'll start to think. So the 3 days go by, and then I think another day goes by. The families are starting to get a little anxious, and then what happens, but all of a sudden Yuri Yudin, who is the guy who decided not to go at the last minute, comes waltzing back into campus, and he's by himself. And he's, like, got no idea why everyone's so freaked out, and everyone's like, where's your friends? And he goes, what? Oh, fuck. And he realizes, like, you know, when we finally reached Vizhai, you know, there was a delay, and Igor told me that I was supposed to telegraph you guys and let you know that they were running a couple days behind schedule. And I was like so out of it because I was hurting so much. I totally forgot until I was at my parents' village and they didn't have a telegraph. So I don't know. I just figured I'd get back at the same time as them. Yeah. And if not, I would just let you know. And he's like, so, you know, don't worry. They said they're 3 days behind. So, you know, right now you think it's 3 days late, but it's actually right on schedule. And so give it another couple days, whatever. He goes back to school, but the parents are still kind of worried.
Yeah.
And finally, on February 20th, they have decided, like, look, okay, so it's been almost 2 weeks since they were supposed to get back. No one's heard anything. They wired out to Vizhai, and Vizhai said they never came back. So they decide they're going to put together a search party. And so they end up getting support not just from like other hiking club members, like amateurs, but who are skilled, but also from the military and the military police. And so they round up a couple of choppers, they get a bunch of search dogs, and a bunch of like experienced hikers. And they also, the Mansi offer to help just because they know the area and they're like, yeah, like we can go We can go
Yeah,
look for them.
we usually don't go that mountain.
Yeah.
I don't know why these
It's
kids
called
went.
Death Mountain.
There's literally nothing there. That's why we name it that. But
Yeah, just 'cause it
we can go
sucks.
check. We've been there
Oh
once or
no,
twice.
they hiked up Death Mountain? Yeah, they shouldn't have done that. There's nothing up there.
Yeah. They're probably
It's
hungry.
Like a super
They're
boring
probably
mountain.
fucking hungry.
Honestly, like, yeah, there's not even rabbits up there. So
Yeah.
they go and they help them look up Death Mountain. And they're looking for a while, and then on the 26th, their mountainside camp is found on the side of Kolat. And so the searchers, when they find the camp, are totally baffled. So the camp is mostly pristine.
Yeah.
The first thing they noticed, though, so everybody was staying in like a big community tent.
Yes.
And some of them would sleep outside on clear nights, like on sleeping bags and stuff, but they would keep all their stuff in the tent. And
Yep.
so the tent is torn apart, and it looks like it's been ripped from the inside because the canvas is like pushed out and off to
Yep.
the sides, and it's sort of half collapsed, and like there's some snow on it. But other than that, the camp is like pristine. There's still food out, like they were getting ready to cook. Most of their warm clothes are still there, and like weirdly enough, the thing that they all notice is that their boots and their shoes are all still there. So they're like, what the fuck? But the only thing that's missing is all the kids. Like, everyone's gone.
Yeah.
And so they have no idea where everyone is, but they see this camp, which is like mostly preserved. And if everyone's gone, like, why don't they have their shoes on? No one's
Yeah.
here. So the next thing that they notice, there's like their flashlights are all still there, but they're all turned on. So someone was using them when they got left behind. And they have a camera there that's propped up, and it's like away facing the horizon, like they were watching something or taking a photo of something on the horizon. But it's been like kind of bad weather lately, so they're like, well, it wasn't like the sunset. Anyway, they're just kind of noticing these things, and then somebody calls out like, hey, like there's footprints over here, and they find what looks like 9 sets of tracks all leading off together in one direction, down the slope towards, there's like a little forest at the bottom of the slope.
Yep.
And so they're like, okay. They follow the tracks, and the tracks eventually, after like 500 meters, the tracks disappear and they're covered in snow and they can't follow them anymore. And they're like, well, it looks like they were headed down towards the forest. Let's go down to the forest and let's check it out.
Yep.
And so they get to the tree line, and they're sort of walking along the tree line, and they come to a large pine tree. And at the base of the large pine tree, they see the remains of a campfire. And they know that this isn't like a local Mansi campfire, because the Mansi don't camp out in the open. They don't mess with Death Mountain because it's boring. They like to stay
they
in
go
the...
to Rabbit's Mountain.
Yeah, but they also, like, if they're going to camp, they camp in the trees because there's less wind in the trees. If there's, a storm, they're more protected in the trees. There's more likely to be food in the trees. So you'll never find, like, a Mansi camp out in the open like this. And so they assume it must be the kids from up the mountain.
Yeah.
So they, shortly thereafter, they find the bodies of Georgy and Yuri Doroshenko, partially buried and also partially naked. They both have no pants on. They have no jackets. One of them is down to just his underwear. One's in his long johns. They have no shoes. And they're both frozen to death.
Yep.
Some reports indicate that there was, like, damage to one of their faces, like likely from a bird or something, but that, I don't know if that's, like, 100% on these two.
Eating an eyeball or something.
Yeah. The tree that they built the fire under shows evidence that someone had been climbing it up to like 5 meters up. There's bark and branches stripped away, and when they look closer, it looks like there's little bits of like blood and skin. So like someone was scrambling up the tree.
Yeah.
And so they're thinking that they were trying to either find the camp or who knows, trying to get away from something. But somebody was trying to climb the tree, and then here they are, and they're both dead. So they backtrack from this scene towards the camp, and they eventually find 3 more bodies. They find Igor Dyatlov, they find Kolmogorova, and they find Slobodin. And they're all, like, apart from each other by, like, several hundred meters, staggered on their way back, and they're all facing the camp. And the way their position makes it look like they either collapsed or were crawling, like, towards the camp, trying to get back to the camp. So it's very strange, and also all 3 of these are found to have frozen to death. So they take these 5, and they send them back for examination, and they're looking for them. And meanwhile, they're like, well, we got to try to find the rest of them. So the rest of the search takes a couple of months because there's still tons of snow in February. And so finally, they get to May. And they find the rest of them once the snow has started to thaw. They're actually back. They're further into the woods than the 2 that were found under the tree. And they find the remaining 3 in a stream of water at the bottom of a small ravine. Their heads and stuff are just like hanging out in this tree in this river as the snow begins to melt. So these 3 are slightly better dressed. They're wearing like warmer clothes. And it actually looks like some of them were wearing the other kids' clothes. So like when someone died, they had like taken their clothes to stay warm. Some of the clothes are like shredded or like partially burned, which is kind of strange. And so then initial examinations for all of these people are that they died of hypothermia, but they eventually send everybody back. And the first 5 that they found prior to the thaw, it is concluded that they died of hypothermia. They had some minor cuts and bruises, but nothing major, nothing fatal. But for these new 3 that they just found, there's new questions. So Thibault Brignoles, he had a fatal major crush wound to his skull. His skull was just shattered. And then Dubinina and Zolotaryov had massive and fatal chest cavity fractures. And so the medical examiner saw them and was like, you usually only see this in like car crashes. Like this is super extensive. But what really freaked him out is that they didn't have any external injuries like you would have in something like that. So like there was no external trauma, nothing hit them, their skin wasn't abraded. It almost looked like they had gone like very deep underwater and the pressure had crushed their bones. Which is what he said. In addition to this, several of these 3 are disfigured. So Dubinina was missing her tongue, her eyes, most of her lips, and a big chunk of her skull. Zolotaryov was also missing his eyes. And then Alexander Kolevatov had no eyebrows. The skin of his eyebrows had just sort of been ripped away. And in addition, at least 1, possibly 2 of the members' clothing was like heavily irradiated, which was super weird because the bodies didn't show major signs of radiation. And none of the others were irradiated. And so that was always just sort of like a little red herring for them. There was no obvious evidence of an avalanche, an animal attack. It was clear that they had left the camp together and at their own volition. But they had left all their stuff, so they obviously left in a hurry. And so this just basically left everyone thinking like, well, what the fuck happened? And so that's, the mystery of Dyatlov Pass. And then I'm just going to really quickly go through like some of the theories and then talk about like the newest sort of prevailing theory as to what happened. So officially, the investigation ends super quickly after these other 3 are discovered. It ends in the same month in May. And they rule that it was a, quote, unknown compelling natural force that they could not withstand that caused them to die. Which is
sounds like it.
I mean, it's basically a non-answer. He's basically saying like something that was really strong and we don't know what it was, and they're dead. So that's that. Pretty much, yeah. So there's no more official explanation, but they've determined that it doesn't look like there was any sort of like guilty party. There's no one they could blame for their death. There was no wrongdoing. Everyone was sort of cleared of that. I mean, Yuri Yudin, it became pretty obvious once they found the group's journals and they got in touch with Vijay and with his home village that he really did what he said he did. He walked back the day after to Vijay. There's no real way he could have been involved. The Mansi, for a while, people were saying, like, what if the Mansi attacked them? And then people were like, what are you fucking talking about? That's literally never happened. Like, the Mansi are super chill, peaceful people. They live up in the woods. Why would they come out and just, like, randomly kill a bunch of hikers? They don't have, like, some weird, I don't know, religion. They're like, basically just, like, that's just racist. Like, don't.
Yeah.
They definitely didn't do it. They helped us look for them. Like,
I know.
You know what I mean? Like, there's never been an incidence of that ever occurring. So we're going to just move on from that.
Yeah, they just hang out and do their own thing.
They just do their own thing. They don't even like that mountain. That's boring-ass dead mountain.
It's like, not Rabbit's Mountain.
No, they don't go there. Like, why would they,
There's no Rabbit's Mountain. No rabbits, no deer. We don't go there.
We have to reiterate, it's not called Dead Mountain because there's some cool-ass ghost legend or some shit. It's just because it's a sucky mountain. That's all.
Yeah.
So that gets dropped pretty quickly. And so now I'm just going to get into some of the details around this that have come to light since over time. Because basically at the time in 1959, that's it. That's the whole report. Nobody gets any other details. Nothing else gets reported. The military police and the government basically just say, okay, yep, case closed. Everybody shut the fuck up about it. And then they put that case into a secret vault because they like to do that. And they put it in a secret vault, and that's it. But so of note, over the successive years, multiple parties in this region, including another hiking party that was like 50 kilometers away, they report having seen strange orange lights in the sky in the region where the Dyatlov company was hiking. And all throughout that month, from February to March of 59, these lights are seen repeatedly by different people. And it's not just like yokels out in the middle of nowhere saying like, look, there's UFOs. But the military made note of it, and the State Meteorological Service both made note of it. And for whatever reason, they were not allowed to share this information. Then in 1990, Lev Ivanov, who is the lead investigator on the case, who declared that it was like a compelling natural force, whatever, he writes like a magazine article, and he admits that he had absolutely no idea at the time or since how to explain the case, but that during his investigation, he and his team had also seen glowing orange lights in the sky, like off in the distance, and they were told by their superiors to omit that from their report. That was not to be included in the report. Then in 1997, it was discovered that he had kept the group's camera and all of their negatives had been recovered and saved. And so that's how we have all these pictures. You can go online. They're all public domain. There's some really great slideshows and explanations of them. And you can just Google Dyatlov Pass Incident on YouTube, and you can find a lot of these in like super HD. It lends a lot of humanity to it. It's definitely worth looking at. If we had a website, I would have put them on there, but they're readily available. But so the final exposure has been like a thing that conspiracy theorists have really latched onto, because basically it just shows like a black grainy background with what looks like a big flash of light in the center. And the reason people have like latched onto that is because, like I said, they found the camera supposedly at camp pointing off towards the night sky or towards the sky. And so there's conjecture that they had noticed these red flashes in the sky and were trying to photograph them. Yeah, and so that's what that could be. But these are all black and white photos. There's no real way to tell what it is. It could have just been anything, really. But that's the thought, is that that's what it might be. So a local boy in Sverdlovsk named Yuri Kuntsevich, he attended 5 of the 9 funerals for the party members, and he reported at the time and later that they had like weirdly dark tan skin and that their hair had like a bluish color to it, which, I don't know, maybe that could be radiation or who knows. I don't know. He went on to chair
it might be that they had like frostbite.
Maybe. Could have been that. He would go on to chair or that they had been like preserved with iodine for their funerals or something like that, like, because they were so disfigured. So it could have been like nothing. But he went on to chair the Dyatlov Foundation, which is like the main foundation inside Russia that still sort of preserves the memory of this incident. And he's like a main sort of supporting character in the present day part of Icar's book that I read. So he was still kicking around, at least in 2013. And also Icar talks to Yuri Yudin, who passed away like during the writing of the book, but he was alive in 2013 and was still clearly really fucked up about this because the whole thing got so sensationalized. And he was like, my friends died out in the woods. Like, yeah, I get it. Like, maybe it was the Yeti or whatever, but it wasn't. So
those are like all of my friends.
That's like every friend I had, and they're all dead. So he was like clearly very, very, very messed up over this whole thing. They're all memorialized still. You can visit their graves. And since then, like, accusations of military involvement have also become really popular. So people point to the glowing orbs and the super quick conclusion of the investigation, and they sort of fill in the blanks there. And they're like, well, something was going on, and like, why did the government shut it down so quick? But so these are like the prevailing theories. So there's the avalanche theory, which at the time they kind of quickly discounted because the camp was still there. Like, nothing was buried under snow. They found several of the bodies super quickly. It didn't look like there was an avalanche. And at the time, they thought that the slope was too shallow to permit an avalanche. And also, since this event, over 100 camping parties, either part of the search or after the search, had gone up and camped in similar conditions, and none of them reported any conditions that could possibly have led to an avalanche. So for a while, that was like considered like not even worth thinking about. Also, like another thing, like not, and this I think is legitimate, but both Dyatlov and Sasha Zolotaryov are master skiers, and so most people that are that good and spend that much time on the mountain, like, would never agree to camp somewhere where there was even a risk of that. They would have said, let's just trek back down the mountain at night. It's better than staying up here. And they didn't do that. So there's really little evidence, but this is sort of the new prevailing theory. It's possible, even though this sounds crazy, that a small, like, localized slab of snow could have broken loose and fallen directly on the tent. They've discovered that even though the snow lands on the side of the mountain and can create a certain illusion that it's a pretty mild slope, there are parts where the slope is like just steep enough where an avalanche is theoretically possible. And they've done experiments where they've sort of modeled this. The Russian government reopened their investigation in 2015, and they found that this was the case. And then again, this year in 2021, they used digital models based on the snow effects from the movie Frozen. They got the assets to that because, like, I guess some guy who studies this stuff saw the movie and was like, you know, not the world's best movie, but the snow effects are, like, very good. And so he asked for permission to use the modeling for them and used it to recreate many events, but this one in particular. And they found that snow under the right conditions could avalanche on this particular mountain. And what they think happened is that, like, a particularly heavy slab of sort of semi-frozen snow broke off, slammed directly into the tent and kind of nowhere else. And again, even that, like, it wouldn't have been fatal, except that they found all of their bedrolls had been arranged on top of their skis to give them support on the side of the mountain. And so normally you would have either just been, like, hurt or bruised or maybe buried under the snow. But because their skis were behind them, it created a rigid backing for them. So instead of bending, their bodies just absorbed the full weight of the impact. And that would account for some of the, like, shattering, crushing blows, but without the external harm. And it's not a 100% thing, but that is now, in 2021, the prevailing theory. That it doesn't explain everything. Like, we'll probably never know, like, why they ran down to the woods, what happened to some of them that ran back, like, why this, why that, why the radiation. Like, that's still not explained, but the initial trauma and the reason that they fled camp is thought to be that. That some of them dragged their friends away to try to save them and then went back to camp for food, but they were all cold, and they just slowly succumbed to their injuries and to death.
So the ones with the trauma deep in the woods were probably, like, brought there by the friends.
Well, so actually, so they were either brought there by their friends, or there's also, like, a theory which will come up in a minute, but that basically they stumbled into the woods and fell into that ravine, and, like, that's how they got their injuries. So that's also a possibility. Another one that's kind of interesting is that it could have been a katabatic wind, which is I kind of found this a little hard to understand, but basically, from what I gather, it's just a specific type of theoretically possible wind pattern where cold air coming off the top of a mountain gathers a weird amount of momentum in a very localized place and then basically whips down the side of the mountain like a sledgehammer and slams into whatever is right at the bottom. So this katabatic wind could have formed and slammed down just specifically into their tent and, like, crushed the fuck out of just them and left everything else intact.
So bad.
Yeah, oh my god. And so this is possible, but again, it's super rare, and they haven't, like, been able to show that it happens at this particular mountain at Holatchal. So this is sort of not, like, super supported, but it's theoretically possible. In Eicher's book, he's the guy who sort of popularized the infrasound theory, which is that in this particular area, and this is also theoretically possible, the wind blowing off the surroundings creates a certain ultrasonic frequency that when it interacts with the human inner ear, like, causes panic and frustration and sometimes aggression in people. And so we know these sounds exist. They can be created artificially, but his idea was that this happened. So everybody all of a sudden, like, panics and they don't know why. And they're like, something's wrong. Are you hearing that? What's wrong? What's wrong? And they run away because they think something's going on. They all just book it out of camp. They get, down the mountain and they realize, like, they snap out of it and they're like, fuck, we left all our stuff up there. And so they leave a couple of them down there, and then 3 of them are like, well, we'll trek back and we'll try to make it. But at this point, they're tired, they're freezing, and they all collapse. So they leave 2 people at the edge of the woods as lookouts. So they're climbing up the tree to try to see their friends. And the other 3 rush into the woods to try to get warm, and they slip and fall into the ravine and crack their skulls. So that's another possible explanation. And then the last one that's possible of like the crazy ones is military munitions testing. So one of the prevailing theories is that parachute bomb tests were going on, which is basically where bombs were attached to parachutes and they're dropped from planes and they intentionally detonate like above ground level. And so they don't leave like external damage to the area. But what they'll do is they'll create like a massive shockwave, and so people that are caught in the blast will suffer these kind of like internal injuries without external signs of it, and their internal organs and shit will just be crushed, and they'll be, whatever, they'll die. Or that it was like a similar nuclear test where they were detonating nuclear bombs above, either prematurely or either accidentally prematurely or intentionally prematurely above ground.
Well, you always detonate them above ground.
Oh, that's right. They never hit the ground, do they?
Yeah, you detonate them above for maximum damage.
Yeah. That's probably less likely. So that's just to explain away the radiation, but like there would have been more evidence of radiation elsewhere than just like the couple people's clothes.
Yeah, I mean, I guess what it could have been maybe like far away they were doing some kind of nuclear.
Sure.
And some of them just hit specific particles.
Yeah.
And they were just stuck on those particles, and this dude's clothing just got those only particles.
And that is, again, theoretically possible, and it's possible enough that this is like considered one of the plausible explanations. And this is sort of supported, people then piggyback off this and say like, so the military then came in to inspect like the results of their test, found all these kids just like accidentally murdered on the side of the mountain. And so they were like, well, fuck. And they arranged them to look like something crazy happened. They set their camp up for them and then just like arranged the bodies. And there is a little bit of physical evidence to support this. Some of the bodies, the way like rigor mortis works, you can kind of tell if a muscle has been jerked into a certain position after rigor mortis has set in, which is called like livor mortis or something. And so there was evidence that some of these bodies were moved after injury or after death. And also the way the tent was set up, some reports claim that the tent was like totally set up improperly, which again would be really weird for like grade 2 hiking experts to not know how to set up a tent. So, but that's, kind of hearsay, and who really knows?
At this point.
Outside of that, there's the Yeti. There's U.S. spy planes because why not blame it on us? Dropping photo flash bombs. We did drop photo flash bombs over the Ural Mountains. Like, we actually did sneak in and do that shit. Yeah. But not, like, right there and right at that time. But who knows? Same with the Russian military.
Yeah, we were always flying shit over the Soviet Union.
Of course. And same with the Russian military. They were doing parachute bomb tests up in that region. And that's actually potentially more likely, like, because they did have 1 or 2 scheduled in that basic region. And so it's possible that they were, like, off target and that this happened, which would explain why they shut down the investigation like immediately. Like, oh, well, no harm, no foul. It's a mystery. They're all heroes. Let's make a statue. But so, yeah, basically, like, the targeted avalanche or slab avalanche theory is most likely. But the important takeaway is that this is not like a story about like a bunch of dummies who went out and did something stupid and got themselves killed. There's no probably like ghost. There might be some foul play. It's definitely an interesting mystery, but these were well-equipped, really intelligent people that were doing something they were totally prepared to do, and they got caught up in something that they had no control over and, found themselves, unfortunately, perishing. And we will probably never know the why or the how. And it's fun to think that it might have been.
Yeti.
Yeti. I mean, honestly, like, it's fun to think that it's that, but it's probably not that. But what if it is that? It might be the Yeti. Or what it could be is that there's a time loop set up in some sort of secret facility. And that it was actually the ghosts or the demon mutated forms of the people themselves who, like, went back in time and then killed themselves.
Yeah.
Which is
so anyway, we watched this really fucking bad movie about it.
Yeah, I made Evan watch a movie about this called, what was it called? Devil's Pass?
Yeah, the Devil's Pass.
The Devil's Pass.
Yeah, I definitely I definitely did a 1d10 sanity roll. Took some serious sanity damage from it.
It was really, really rough. So this is a movie that also came out in 2013, and I think was definitely like riding high on Eicher's book, and it's sort of like tough to explain. I think you should definitely all watch it. I guess I wouldn't.
I watched the whole thing. I didn't have to pause it.
Yeah, I sat through the entire movie. I watched it with my girlfriend, and the whole time she was like, "What the fuck is this?" Because I told her the basic story because I find this whole Dyatlov Pass thing really interesting.
Yeah.
And she was like, "This doesn't sound anything like." She was like, "There were way cooler possibilities that really could have happened that would have been scarier than this." And I was like, I don't know what to tell you, but I'm glad we watched it. It was
Yeah, so the movie itself is about some American college students who decide to recreate the journey at the same time of year. And it's like a found footage movie.
And they kind of, there's less of them, but they kind of fit some of the archetypes. So there's like the rich kid who's like not snobby,
Yeah.
There's
who is
like
played
the jokester.
by, like, a guy who like looks like he's like 35 or 40.
Yeah.
And he's supposed to be a college
He's got like
student.
just a chin beard and like a knit cap.
And like wrinkles all over his face.
Yeah.
And he's supposed to be a college student.
He's supposed to be a college. Dude, so I actually wrote down some like random notes on this, and it's long enough ago that I don't really remember. But I remember there's a scene where they're like all on a truck, like heading out.
Oh god, are you gonna say the same thing as me?
Yeah. And they're like talking about how shitty it is that they're riding on this truck and they have to ride like 50 miles in the cold. And one guy reaches over and grabs a potato and takes a bite of it and says like, "At least we have enough potato
to chunk
donkey." And I was like, "Fuck yeah, dude! This is a comedy."
That's so funny. That's the first thing I wrote too.
Oh, yeah, same. Man. And so the rich kid is named J.P. Hauser, and I just wrote chin beard, knit cap, laid back rich kid rocks.
Yeah. Also, one of the students claims to have never seen Scooby-Doo.
Oh, yeah. Bananas.
Yeah, don't believe that
How
shit.
are you like a PhD student doing your dissertation on like obscure Russian history and you've never fucking seen Scooby-Doo?
Thelma. Yeah, somebody's like, "Yeah, you're like our Thelma," and she's like, "Fuck does that mean?"
Velma.
Basically, he's like, "You know Thelma, like Scooby-Doo," and she
Velma.
goes, "Oh, you mean the dog?" "Oh, Velma, yeah, whatever." And he goes, "What, like the dog?" Or she says that, and he's like, "No, what?" Whatever. And then let's see. At one point, someone is called Slapnuts. I just wrote that down.
He's like and that's the same scene that I'm about to talk about, where like the female lead and like J.P. Hauser are like hippie mountaineer man are like kind of awkwardly flirting. And she's like, "So how do you stay like warm up here?" And he goes, "Well, I'd like to introduce you to my young friend Colonel Whiskey," and pulls a flask out. And I just thought the idea of calling your flask like my young friend Colonel Whiskey. Yeah. And then like right after that, their other buddy is like sleeping with this other girl and like secretly trying to film her. And then she dies like right during that moment. She just gets like fucking killed.
Yeah.
And then it was PG-13, I want to say. So there was like all these parts where like it sounded like they edited out the F word, and so there's all these like random like freaking, like it's not a freaking Yeti because Yetis don't freaking exist.
Also, it did one of my favorite things that people do in their works of fiction, where they reference way better works with similar themes in their own works. Like this is a movie about people becoming unstuck in time, and it sucks ass. And it continuously mentions a pretty good book about becoming unstuck in time. Yeah. Slaughterhouse 5.
Yeah.
It's like they're just like some guys reading Slaughterhouse 5. And then later on,
it's like the Amazon trade paperback edition of it. Like this is his treasured copy, but like off camera they just like wrinkled it up to make it look like it was like his old copy.
But and also like at the end of the movie they had this part where they're talking about what happens when they walk into the weird wormhole thing. Yeah. And it's like as if you're too stupid as a reader at this point to put two and two together that they're about to like go back in time. They have to bring back up the fact that that somebody was reading Slaughterhouse 5.
Right.
like just to like try to hammer it. Like it's the same theme.
Yeah.
Like, you know what I mean? It's just like, oh
and
my
they're
God.
standing before the portal, and that last scene was nuts. So like, and this movie tries to be like every kind of movie. Like it's like tries to be funny. It tries to be like a found footage film. But then like at the very end, like in the last act, they introduce these like kind of cool like. The monsters would have been kind of cool as like an enemy in a video game. Like they can teleport.
Well, they look like they're from a video game.
Yeah,
for
they
sure.
look shitty. It looks like it's
some of the worst CGI I've ever seen.
But it was kind of cool. Like they're zipping around, like disappearing and reappearing, and they do this whole thing where they like really slowly and really heavy-handedly like make you realize that these two people get trapped at this portal and they're gonna try to escape, and these monsters are hammering on the other side of this door, and they're like, well, it's either going out there and facing them, or we try going through this portal. And they just sort of like guess that it's a portal. Like it's just a shimmering field, and guys like, it's a portal. I bet it'll take you anywhere. And then
they mention Slaughterhouse 5
They mention Slaughterhouse 5, and they
just
mention like
punching you in the face with that reference.
Like, okay, we'll try to get it to take us right to the front of this place, and then it does, but it turns out it's like back in 59, and the military finds them, and they take them back into the dungeon, and they lock them up. And then they
throw them on meat hooks.
They throw them on meat hooks.
Into the back.
And then they show that, like, it's them. Like, they went back in time, mutated into the monsters that were just trying to kill them, were locked away in this cave. And then when they, in the future, come back and open the cave, they unwittingly unleash themselves. And then they have to try to survive an attack by themselves. And the way that they show this is like earlier in the movie, the female lead, they talk about how she has like an angel wing tattooed on her neck. And so when they throw these two like hideous monsters like up on the meat hooks, one of them just like lifts its head and moves it to the side for no reason, and they show an angel tattoo on its neck.
As if you didn't already get it.
Right, and then you're just like, oh man, it was them the whole time. Like they were the monsters.
As if you didn't figure that out 20 minutes before that was going to be them.
But then also like 20 minutes before that, it was like a weird college like sex movie, like where they're just like fooling around on a mountainside. And I don't fucking know. They did like a bunch of...
There was also the scene where the two of them, they put down the camera, and most of the shot is just the side of the mountain.
Yeah.
But then it's the two people talking, and then the people in the background not looking. And I immediately am like, wait, I should probably be looking at this mountain, because some kind of monster is going to run by, right?
Sure.
And then, lo and behold, two monsters, kind of like, like, kind of like triaps across the mountain, then hide behind some rocks. It looks so fucking stupid.
God. I honestly missed that. I didn't even notice that, because I was like,
the second I saw the shot that they were doing, I was like, found footage movie, they're definitely going to show the creature in the background before anybody else sees it.
Right.
There's that, what? Oh, yeah. They also, like, mention, I remember this, the Philadelphia experiment, which they talk about on the QAnon Anonymous podcast.
Yes.
Was that the Alpi Alec episode or something?
I don't remember, but I remember hearing about it, and I actually, that would be another really funny episode to do.
Yeah.
Not that this episode was funny. I feel like it wasn't funny at all, but that would be another interesting episode to do. Like people getting like zapped and like fusing with the hull of a ship, and all for teleportation. So they turn it from like a Dyatlov Pass conspiracy movie, and then at the last minute, like the conspiracy is like switched to the Philadelphia experiment, and the plot is actually summarized by saying it's actually that. So it's like wrong conspiracy. It's not the Yeti or anything. It's actually the Philadelphia experiment, but here in Russia, and it made monsters, and that's Dyatlov Pass.
Yeah, the Soviets tried to do the same thing that the Americans did with the...
and they couldn't even do that right. Wah, wah.
Yeah. And it was just like, what the fuck, dude?
Yeah, this was some kind of movie.
So much happening at the end. Like, they just kept shifting tone.
Yeah, it was a lot. It was a lot, for sure.
Yeah.
All right. I mean, is that it?
Yeah.
I think that's it.
Yeah, it's like an hour and a half.
I don't have any more notes. Yeah, it's like an hour and a half.
I guess I will say, I think I forgot to say this last time, I watched Aquaman.
Oh, you did?
So just a little DCEU update. You know, going to keep doing that as I watch.
Hell yeah.
That was probably the best one.
Yeah. It's not bad, right? It's fun.
Yeah, I mean, there's an awesome part where a bunch of crab people are, like, fighting.
Dude, I didn't get to that part. I still haven't finished it. It's taken me so long to watch that movie.
Yeah, that one still took me two sittings. I watched it.
Yeah.
I started it on a Friday, and I think I finished on Saturday.
I can't ever finish those movies in one sitting. I never can.
I mean, I look at it the same way as that famous old Trump tweet where he said, the people at Coca-Cola are mad at him for saying something. He said, "That's all right. I'll still keep drinking that garbage."
Yeah.
That's pretty much how I feel about superhero
Fair
movies.
enough. Yeah. I'll still keep drinking that garbage.
Yeah.
Well, on that note, thanks again for listening, folks. As always, you can find links to our Twitter feeds on the episode description. All of our music, again, is done... Excuse me. All of our music is done by Interesting Times Gang. You can find their Bandcamp as well on our episode description.
itgang.bandcamp.com.
Yeah, and if you like what we're talking about, you like the show, you don't like the show, you want to hear us talk about something that you want to talk about, you're just like super down to talk about DC movies with Evan, drop us a line. We would love to hear from you. And until next time.
That actually reminds me, I did get our first listener request.
Did you really?
So, yeah, I'll tell you about that offline. But
okay, yeah, it's a secret, so mind your own fucking business.
Yeah, fuck off, losers.
Yeah, all right, bye.
Yeah. Also, please, if you enjoy it, shut the fuck up. You're always the one who takes forever to say goodbye. Give us
I just don't like goodbyes.
Just rate and review us on iTunes if you enjoy it. That helps us with the algorithm.
Yes, please do. We know most of you are out there not doing that, and that's okay. But if you did that,
poorly upon you.
If you did that, it would honestly make a huge difference. If everybody that listens to this show liked us on iTunes, it would be huge for us.
Followed us on Twitter.
Mm-hmm. You could follow us on Twitter. That's also cool. And any of this stuff would be... It's a legitimate help, and it's pretty easy. So we do ask if you're able to.
Shouts out our buddy Matt. Always pumping us up.
Yeah. Shout out to Matt.
Anyway. Yeah, shout out Matt. Yep.
Hey, Matt. All right, guys. Until next time.
Peace.
We love you.